Democracy protesters appear to be digging in for a long stay. These are live shots tonight from the protest areas in Mongkok and Admiralty. More scuffles broke out earlier today between supporters and opponents of the civil disobedience movement. At the main protest zone in Admiralty last night, another rally was held against the government. Some demonstrators have pitched tents and say they are determined to stay where they are until the government meets their demands. Liz Yun begins our coverage.
About 50 people took part in a morning run from Central to Wan Chai, cheering the student protesters along the way. This runner compares the students' fight for democracy to a marathon, saying she hopes they will not give up easily. Meanwhile, some district councillors called on protesters in Admiralty to end their blockade of Queensway first and then do the same in other occupation areas. This 86-year-old woman says she has been greatly inconvenienced by the blocking of roads because she has swollen feet and is unable to walk for a distance to take other means of transport. One district councillor is not hopeful that the protesters will listen to them.
I don't think it's useful, According to residents, they told me at the beginning they support the appeal of the students, but after 2 weeks they think they can't accept the chaos of the environment, especially the traffic congestion. They make things very inconvenient in the daily life.
Most of the protesters we spoke to are determined to carry on with their occupation protests.
I understand why they are so angry, because for some small shops or some small company, it's really damaging them.
We actually bring some inconvenience for them, but after all those years, we are protested peacefully. The government still have no response.
Along Harcourt Road, colourful camping tents are sprouting up as protesters respond to the one-person, one-tent call by student leaders. Some of them, intending on staying put until they see progress in their fight for democracy, have even put up house numbers on their temporary home sweet home. Over in Mongkok, an alliance in support of the police collected signatures from people who want police action to clear out the protesters and barricades. Convener of the alliance, Letitia Lee, urged the police to launch a clearance operation in Mongkok tomorrow. Her group plans to visit the US Consulate General and the German Consulate General on Monday to demand the two countries not to intervene in Hong Kong's internal affairs. Lee also thinks that the Legislative Council should be dissolved, as some of the lawmakers are in support of the civil disobedience movement. Scuffles broke out today between members of Lee's group and the occupiers. One of the occupiers claimed that he was hit on the head by a flying object. Police intervened to separate the two groups of people. Liz Yun, TVB News.
The Hong Kong Federation of Students and Scholarism have written an open letter to President Xi Jinping, and they criticized the Hong Kong government for ignoring public opinion on political reform. Speaking at Admiralty this evening, student activist Alex Chow said that President Xi talked about Chinese people achieving the China dream. The students say Hong Kong's dream is to have genuine universal suffrage. Chow pointed out the reason why the National People's Congress Standing Committee made its decision was because the Hong Kong government didn't truly reflect the public's views in its report on political reform. The students say if Xi does not respond to their letter, they will escalate their protest action. The chief secretary says she was disappointed to cancel a meeting with student leaders that was originally slated for yesterday. But Carrie Lam said today any such talks must be based on decisions made by the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Meanwhile, the only Hong Kong member on the NPC Standing Committee, Rita Fan, says it would take strong reasons and a change in circumstances for the country's top legislative body to review decisions already made.
If there is very strong evidence that that decision should be reviewed, it would not be possible to rule out the possibility of reviewing that decision. But up to this moment, I do not see any reason why that decision needs to be changed.
A member of the Basic Law Committee is proposing an independent body to monitor public opinion. Albert Chen says it would help boost public support for the government's political reform proposal. Diane To reports.
With Beijing not about to budge on the framework it's set for the SAR's political reform, law professor Albert Chen said the only thing that can realistically make a difference in the 2017 chief executive election is the second round of public consultation on political reform. Chen suggested the government take a page from its colonial predecessors in their handling of the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
For example, the establishment of a public opinion assessment office headed by an independent and publicly acceptable figure like the former Chief Justice, who can supervise the conduct of various public opinion polls to monitor public opinion in the second round of the consultation.
He said the key is that this body must be trusted by the wider public to be independent of government control. This body could then produce a report on how much public backing the government's proposal for the 2017 CE election really has before it's put before LegCo for a vote.
And democracy would mean that there are different views in society which need to be considered before a decision is made. So this democratic way of dealing with the political reform should be acceptable to those in favor of democracy.
Chen added that if public views show majority support for the proposal and it still doesn't get the required two-thirds support in LegCo to be passed, the chief executive will then have the constitutional right to dissolve the legislature. However, this would be a risky move for the CE, since according to the Basic Law, if the proposal still fails to be passed by the new legislature voted in afterwards, then the CE will have to step down. Diane To, TVB News.
Meanwhile, tram services in Happy Valley have resumed after Occupy protesters briefly opened up Queensway overnight. Rani Samtani with that story.
Trams on the Happy Valley Loop are back up and running. This man said it's good they've restarted, as he would have had to take a minibus or walk to his destination. Tram services are now limited to a circular route around Happy Valley and Causeway Bay. Demonstrators are still blocking Queensway in Admiralty and Yi Wall Street in Causeway Bay, and so tram services between Icehouse Street and Tinlock Lane and between Percival Street and Victoria Park remain suspended. Last night, Hong Kong Tramways and the Federation of Students came to an agreement to allow tram services in Happy Valley to resume. At 3 a.m., 8 empty trams were allowed to pass through the Queensway barricades. Protesters manning the area immediately put the barricades back in place after the trams went by. Police criticized demonstrators for only allowing certain vehicles to pass.
Anyone using their own means to control the entry of certain vehicles selectively is irrational, unreasonable, and illegal. This contravenes their claims of rights of peaceful protest. At present, the last obstacles obstructing Queensway and the roads nearby is not directly related to the major protest locations. They have enough space to express their views. This harassing behavior is highly unreasonable. I hope people obstructing the roads illegally can remove the obstacles so that tram service can resume normal.
The police noted that the eastbound and westbound tram services have been suspended for 2 weeks, causing serious inconvenience to senior citizens and grassroots families that rely on the trams to get around. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
In other news tonight, a woman in her late 30s was killed in a knife attack this morning. A 72-year-old man who reportedly has a history of mental illness is under arrest. Once again, here's Rani Samtani.
Officers arrived at the scene to investigate. According to police, the 37-year-old woman, her husband, and 2 daughters left their flat at around 6 a.m. That's when an elderly man suddenly attacked them in the hallway and poured flammable liquid on them. The husband ran downstairs to get help, while the woman and her children tried to escape using the elevator. The suspect then took out an 8-inch long folding knife and proceeded to stab them. This woman who lives on the 16th floor said she heard a woman screaming for help. Police officers said the suspect returned to his flat in the same building after the incident and attempted to set himself on fire. He was later arrested. Officers found a knife in his possession, as well as plastic bottles containing flammable liquid and lighters in the hallway. The woman sustained multiple cuts to her shoulder, arm, and mouth. She was rushed to United Christian Hospital, where she was later declared dead. Her 5-year-old daughter sustained injuries to her face and was also taken to hospital for treatment. Police noted that the victim's family had been living in the building for 6 or 7 years, while the suspect moved in 4 years ago. Sao Mau Ping District Crime Unit said there was no record of the families having any disputes before, and so it's believed to be an isolated incident. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
Elsewhere, the United Nations says thousands could be massacred if the Syrian border town of Kobani falls to Islamic State fighters. The warning comes as the militants close in on the besieged town. 3 weeks into the siege of Kobani, Turkish ground forces continue to look on from just a few hundred meters away. Turkey has said it won't allow the town to fall to Islamic State fighters, but so far there's no indication its military is about to intervene to save the town. Kurdish forces say the U.S.-led airstrikes alone are not enough to halt the militants' advance. Speaking to a reporter by phone, a Kurdish defense chief said Kobani is now surrounded on 3 sides by Islamic State militants. He's called for outside help to create a corridor to evacuate the remaining civilians. The United Nations is warning of mass casualties if the militants overrun the town.
When 1/3 of Kobani city has been overtaken by ISIL, this is a source of really great concern. That is why from the beginning of this crisis, I have been urging the leaders of the several countries, whoever may have capacity and means to do all what they can.
Turkey has agreed to support efforts to train and equip moderate Syrian opposition forces, but the U.S. doesn't yet know if Turkey is willing to do the training inside its own borders. A U.S. Defense Department planning team is heading to Turkey next week to discuss the details.
Part of those discussions will include how far Turkey is willing to go with commitments. Certainly one of those questions will be, would they be willing to provide training locations? As you know, Saudi Arabia has already committed, and we have other countries that have offered sites as well.
Turkey and other U.S. allies want the U.S. to create a no-fly zone inside Syrian territory, but the U.S. is resisting creating